no one has to do anything, but what's the effective consequence of putting this in place? Does it create an expectation by Kiwi Rail that they might be able to take some enforcement action, or I guess we're just not quite clear on what the purpose and why it needs to sit inside the plan change if it is just a non-statutory layer. Why can't it just sit in the GIS maps, for example?
Yeah, and I, it has been a recent introduction over the last couple of years. So whangarei, as you've mentioned, and then jury in Auckland, the 2 jury precincts, it went through 2 years ago as a layer. So I guess to answer your question about whether there's been any practical differences that KiwiRail has seen, the data isn't there for that, and jury is yet to be constructed. The intent is certainly not that KiwiRail could take enforcement action. There's no obligations that anyone could be breaching to enable that trigger to happen. It's an information layer, which is that's definitely used in other planning mechanisms. For some of the branch line, whangarei includes a noise information layer as well as a vibration information layer, rather than that noise one for a branch line doesn't also have any I guess obligations or consenting requirements on an applicant. What it does mean is that someone who is purchasing property and looking at that district plan and getting that information through a LIM report is on notice, and if they choose, if they're building, to reorientate their development so that vibration might be less of effect, or put in place other measures that gives them that information that vibration might be a concern and they might want to take those effects. But absolutely there is no I guess hook that KiwiRail could use to say you didn't do something, therefore we're taking enforcement action against you. It genuinely is intended to provide further information, and I think to that extent having it in the plan is how that information is conveyed to a plan reader.
Thank you. And so just picking up on your point there about the LIM, we had a submission this morning from Mr. Matheson for Kāinga Ora that whether or not something like that might show up on a LIM was pretty much at the council's discretion. In your view, would having this layer within the plan, rather than having it, say, for example, just as one of the GIS maps that's not referenced at all in the plan, would that enable, I guess, or increase the likelihood it would show up on a LIM?
Certainly, in my experience, LIM reports tend to attach the planning maps at the back, and to the extent that there is an overlay that says vibration alert overlay layer, someone sees that, covers their property, they then check out what the key means and get that information. I think there is a much higher likelihood that it would turn up in a LIM report if it's part of the planning maps, as opposed to just sitting in a GIS system, which might require someone to actively go into that specific system.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon. Right, where you go.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Grinlinton-Hancock. I'm the RMA team leader for KiwiRail. Not intending to read my statement in full, just give you the main highlights. Just in relation to importance of rail in Tauranga, rail is fundamental to the safe and efficient movement of people and goods throughout New Zealand, which is clearly recognised by the significant investment that the government has made and is continuing to make in the ongoing operation and expansion of the rail network. The benefits of rail are well known. For example, it produces at least 70% less carbon emissions per tonne of freight carried compared to heavy road freight, which is going to the designated corridor for the main coast, East Coast main trunk line passes through Tauranga and is a key part of the KiwiRail network nationally. It's a very busy freight line with around 188 train movements a week to the west of Tauranga. And we are expecting that freight and passenger demand on rail will continue to grow, and growth in the use of the East Coast Main Trunk is expected as part of a mode shift in freight, moving freight off roads and onto rail in relation to helping to reduce emissions and meet New Zealand's goals of less carbon. It's critical that the ongoing operation and future development of the rail network is protected and provided for by including appropriate controls in Plan Change 33. Just with regard to setbacks, setbacks provide a physical distance between development and the rail corridor. The setback mitigates against the need for people to enter the rail corridor by providing sufficient space for activities like maintenance to occur on adjoining sites without those people being forced to access the rail corridor because of a lack of space or an ability to move. People entering the rail corridor are a significant risk to their own safety. The rail corridor carries heavy freight trains that travel at speed and they cannot stop on a dime. Kiwi Rail workers also carry out other dangerous activities within the corridor, like the use of welding equipment to maintain track. The council officer seems to think that a 6 metre setback is already provided for. This is on the basis that there's 1 metre on the landowner's property and 5 metres on Kiwi Rail's land measured from the rail track. The setback sought by Kiwi Rail is measured from the rail corridor designation boundary and not from the track. A 1 metre setback within properties adjoining the rail corridor is not sufficient. This would require adjoining landowners to ask Kiwi Rail for permission to access the rail corridor to undertake maintenance and other activities, particularly those which involve working at height. In my opinion, it would be a poor planning outcome if the options for landowners who need to use and access their buildings for maintenance are either that the landowner needs to seek permission to encroach onto the rail corridor, or instead they choose not to obtain permission and therefore trespass on the rail corridor and run the risk of being hit by a train. The better planning outcome is to provide an adequate setback within a landowner's own property for their buildings to be accessed and being able to maintained so that encroachment into the rail corridor is not required. Kiwi Rail takes the safety of its staff and those communities near the rail network extremely seriously and cannot support the council officer's approach to include a 1 metre setback in Plan Change 33. Kiwi Rail seeks a 5 metre setback in the medium density and high density residential zones to enable the residents of the district to use and maintain their buildings on their properties safely while also protecting rail operations from interference. Kaingora suggests that a 2.5 metre setback is sufficient to accommodate necessary maintenance activities. I disagree with this on the following basis. The height in relation to boundary standard cannot be relied on to provide a sufficient setback, in particular as Kaingora is seeking a relaxation of the standard. Kaingora's evidence in support of a 2.5 metre setback is based on scaffolding dimensions from higher pool. But the district plan cannot require people to obtain scaffolding from a particular supplier. And if the higher pole equipment was used, a 2.5 metre setback then only allows 0.3 metres around the base of that scaffolding, which is not enough space to accommodate the movement of people and materials or account for the risk of objects being dropped from that scaffolding onto the rail corridor. The 5 metres sought by Kiwi Rail enables typical maintenance activities to be undertaken, including scaffolding, support structures to stabilise scaffolding, space required for people to move around the scaffolding, use of mechanical access equipment, and allow an exclusion zone for dropped objects. The proposed setback rule does not prevent all building within the setback area. Resource consent can be obtained to build within 5 metres of the rail corridor boundary if landowners can show that safety concerns can be adequately managed. To assist council officers, Kiwi Rail submission sought the inclusion of a matter of discretion relating to setbacks. Lastly, in relation to noise and vibration, KiwiRail is seeking retention of the existing noise provisions in the operative district plan to apply to noise-sensitive activities within 40 metres of the rail corridor, and the application of a rail vibration alert layer up to 100 metres from the rail corridor. Dr. Charles's evidence shows that there are very real health effects on people from rail noise and vibration that require mitigation. His evidence outlines that adverse noise and vibration effects are experienced 100 metres from the rail corridor. KiwiRail accepts that in its submission, it sought retention of the 40-metre noise controls, but considers the existing provisions are inadequate to manage rail noise, particularly as the rail network grows with proposed intensification. Noise controls to 100 metres are regularly sought by KiwiRail and have been included in district plans throughout the country. KiwiRail will therefore be seeking 100 metres in the next district plan review. With respect to vibration, as outlined by Ms. Gunnell, KiwiRail has refined its position and is willing to accept a vibration alert layer. And that layer is an information layer to put adjacent property owners on notice of vibration effects. It's less onerous land use control because it has no rules or standards to attach to it. That's all I propose to talk to today.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes. Just in terms of the setback, the 5 metre, 2.5 metre, etc., have you provided any evidence as to how many properties would be affected by that setback? And have we got a plan of that?
That's a question for Ms. Hepplethwaite.
Okay, I'll pass that through to her. In terms of the 5 metre versus 2.5 metre, we obviously heard from Water that in other district plans it has been 2.5 metres, and was just wanting to understand what, I mean, you've said today that there's a need for not just the scaffolding for people to get around it, but just wanting to understand, has the 2.5 metre been a problem in practice where it's been included in district plans for you, or is it just that, you know, more is better? I guess I'm wanting to know, is there an actual problem here that you're wanting to address?
There is an actual problem, and yes, there has been provision made in other district plans where 2.5 has been accepted. That was done on a very bespoke basis up in Whangarei. Since that time, we have done a lot more research and have prepared, or in the very end stages of preparing, a section 32, which quite clearly shows that 5 metres, if you're looking at scaffolding and access around scaffolding and the fall or the potential from objects falling from scaffolding when working at height, that 5 metres is the more appropriate measure.
And then just in terms of your Appendix B, which is again on the 5 metres, etc., I was just wondering where that came from. Is that part of the research that you did, or does that come out of a document in terms of some sort of guidelines or standards?
That's come out of guidelines and standards.
And then I was just down the bottom, it's got 5.9 to 6.2 metres, and then it's got 6 metres. It seemed to me like the distance is 6 metres from the boundary in some of those examples. I was just wondering why you're asking for 5 and not 6, if I'm looking at those diagrams the right way.
We are trying to be pragmatic about this. You know, obviously there are absolute optimal distances, but we're trying to be pragmatic about a reasonable distance without an unreasonable distance, where we can still maintain a level of safety for property owners and for KiwiRail staff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and can you just remind me or let me know, are there other district plans throughout the country that have adopted the 5 metre setback?
I would have to investigate that for you and come back to you.
Okay, so nothing springs to mind in terms of where that's been adopted?
Not specifically, no. Ms.
Thank you.
might be able to.
I can also, I can jump in here. Certainly in Drury, the 2 jury precincts in the AUP, there was a 5 metre setback, and I do acknowledge that there were some geographical reasons there why the developers were very happy to accept that there was roads and other elements. We have for other IPIs done a blurb on setbacks around the country, so we'd be very happy to provide that to you. I guess just to qualify it with, as Ms. Grimlington Hancock indicated, KiwiRail's been doing some much more work on that this year, and so it is an evolving game, and certainly earlier acceptances of reduced setbacks, now appreciating that you haven't seen that research yet, and it's unfortunately not quite yet ready to be made public, but I certainly the 5 metre distance is, when you put it all stack it up, that's what it kind of adds up to, and happy to provide that list so you do have some context for other planning processes.
Thank you. And then just in terms of, I guess, the size of the setback again, is it dependent, I mean, is that an average in terms of, the research that's been done, the average has come out at that's sort of what we need? Or is it very much dependent on the local topography and the local conditions? Is 5 metres required everywhere, or is it likely to be less in certain areas?
That is a question best answered by Ms. Hepworth-Waite, who's a lot closer to that Section 32 analysis than I am.
Thank you. I've just got some further questions in terms of the setback, and I'm just looking at your Appendix A, where you give an example in relating to scaffolding. And if I look at maybe that third image on that page 11.
Yep.
Obviously, you have it. Thank you. Obviously, there's an example here where scaffolding's been erected on a building in the vicinity of KiwiRail assets, but also in the vicinity of a road of some style. And I'm looking at that example there's obviously clearly not a 5 metre setback, and that's possible there with that particular building. Obviously, the scaffolding's been constructed, and I would hope in complying with WorkSafe requirements that you've quoted, but there doesn't seem to be any diagonal bracing there, and I'm just trying to see whether the 5 metre that you've put forward as being what you're seeking, based on what would be diagonal bracing, is really necessary in all situations. And I'm also, in terms of the concerns that KiwiRail have raised about falling objects from scaffolding, that's obviously a problem in lots of situations. And are you aware of any means by which that falling objects can be prevented of, say, for example, falling into a KiwiRail asset?
So to address your last question first, I'm aware that there is the ability to put mesh on scaffolding in order to prevent objects falling. I'm also aware of a couple of situations where we've had wind whip that same mesh off the scaffolding and wrap it around some of our electrified lines. So it's, I guess, which one is worse in some respects? So that's a difficult one to answer. Looking at that third picture, whether or not there would be a setback from, the outriggers versus the scaffolding that's in that particular picture, my understanding is that our research is based on what people could typically get access to as a member of the public, in terms of types of scaffolding available, and it does depend somewhat on people's economics and what they can afford. So what we were aiming to do is be pragmatic and look at sort of not lowest common denominator, but what would be the most commonly used.
Okay. And my second question is looking at where KiwiRail assets are in Tauranga. Have you done any work assessing the impact on these setbacks may have in terms of the effect on medium density housing, in terms of the loss of potential for medium density housing?
That is something that Ms. Hepplethwaite has looked at.
Okay, so we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I suspect my issue is also one for Ms. Hepplethwaite, but I'll just flag it now that as I read the provisions that are being recommended, it includes buildings and structures. Now, structures is a very wide definition under the RMA, and I don't think there's a definition in the plan which reduces that term. And I know from other jurisdictions that in actual fact that's been interpreted to include barbecues and those sorts of things. I can't imagine that's what KiwiRail's intended. So maybe Ms. Hepplethwaite can clarify that. Buildings is pretty obvious, it's under the Building Act, and that's pretty extensive, but maybe just have a think about whether structures are a matter that KiwiRail really wants to try and curtail. So next witness, I think.
Yes, I'll ask Dr. Charles to present briefly now.
Oh, invisible for a moment there, Dr. Charles. Yes.
Good afternoon. So I'll take it that my evidence has been read. So I won't.
Yep.
I won't speak to that. Really, the scope of the submission has limited the amount to which I probably need to speak today. So in my evidence, I've set out the details of noise and vibration effects that can arise, but I understand through this process the extent of the noise overlay is not changing. So I won't talk about that unless you've got any questions. And for vibration, in my evidence, there are health effects there, and from a technical point of view, they warrant more detailed controls. But as I understand, KiwiRail's now proposing an alert layer, which would have no specific controls. So again, I won't go into the details unless you've got any particular questions, which I'm happy to take now.
I had a question which I put to John Stiles this morning, and I don't know whether you had a chance. Did you tune in while Kai and Lauder were giving their evidence this morning?
I didn't tune in, but I have read his rebuttal statements he wrote.
Thank you. So I asked him about the alert layer and whether or not he supported the 60 or the 100. And his view was that 60 was more appropriate than 100. And he gave a number of reasons for that, including that some of the material, I think, that a 100 metre setback was based on had been done in response to complaints rather than just sort of generally occurring. And I just wondered whether you wanted to speak to that issue in terms of the 60 versus the 100 and what that 100 is based on.
Yeah, so that of the table of how many things there are, there's one or two of them which are in response to complaints. So that for a couple of the lines in that table, that's correct. But I mean, this is, you know, as it happens where one of those measurements happens to be in this district, the levels do go out. I mean, and I'm not saying that's representative of the whole district, but the the measurements which relate to the network in its normal operating condition shows that the levels will typically go out further than 100 in many instances, but 100 provides an appropriate level. And given the fact that there aren't any obligations on homeowners, it's an alert layer, it's to alert them to the potential effect. I think it's only prudent to extend out to 100 metres, where the data shows generally it does reach for the operational network.
Okay.
So I think
and then
the direct question about, I think if you actually look through that list, it would be incorrect to write off all of that data as being in response to complaints. There is something in there that's response to complaints, but not the majority of it.
I think another reason he also gave was that because there's relatively small number of movements, and he also mentioned there's almost always a loss between the buildings and the ground itself. That's what my notes say. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, in these processes in some other districts, there are relatively small numbers of movements, but the East Coast main trunk and the Mount Maunganui branch line have regular freight movements. They're some of the higher used lines, and as I understand it, Michelle Grinling and Hancock, maybe I'll speak further. I understand that this is a kind of a key rail freight corridor, so this isn't a case where there are a few movements. If you're comparing rail to road, where rail you're counting movements in the tens and road you're counting them in the thousands, then yes, there's fewer movements. But in terms of the New Zealand rail network, this is a relatively well-used bit of rail network.
And just finally, with the Mr. Stiles also sort of talked about his view of the necessity or otherwise for the alert layer, and said, well, actually, there's things that KiwiRail can do within its network to reduce vibration, like slowing down at night, avoiding acceleration before the receiving environment, etc., has to deal with it. Do you have any views on that, whether the alert level is necessary, or they could be dealt with through KiwiRail's own sort of operational choices?
So KiwiRail should and do implement good practice measures to maintain their track and their rolling stock, and those measures that they undertake do influence the vibration. So at some point they regularly have a survey vehicle that measures the alignment of the track that goes around 3 or 4 times a year, and they have maintenance to adjust any inconsistencies in the track, and they've got automated monitoring of wheel condition to identify wheel flats, which is one of the things that contribute to vibration. So there are things that KiwiRail does as part of its standard operation that does reduce vibration. There are, in the example, there's a section of the Mount Maunganui spur that got realigned to make way for Wyden State Highway 2. And when that got realigned, there was a section of that got put onto a resilient ballast mat, which reduces vibration. So if you dig up the network and you put in ballast mat, you can further reduce vibration. That's not practical to do across the existing operational network, but where you're building new network next to houses, that may be practical. But even when you do all of that, there's still vibration. You might pull the extent of it in a bit, but you really, for a rail, unless you're going for a building an entirely separate, a concrete box that's sitting on springs or something, unless you're building an entirely separate structure, you can't internalize that effect. So there's always some residual vibration. So with normal maintenance, the changes you'll make will be fairly minor. If you completely rebuild the track with normal vibration isolation, you'll pull it in more significantly, but you won't completely internalize it. So I think it's, whatever you do, there's always going to be a need for a control layer. The extent of that might vary if you go for a more extreme change to the network.
Thank you.
Dr. Charles, I've read through your evidence and I just wanted to touch on 2 points. In your section 5.3, you referred to careful design of building, location, orientation and materials, etc. Future occupants of the building can be protected from most significant adverse effects. We heard this morning of some costs associated with relatively modest residential buildings of something of the order of another $100,000 to try and internalise or avoid those costs with base isolation and a range of other things in terms of plumbing and drainage. What's your view on the costs associated with the careful design of building location and orientation and materials to deal with the most significant adverse effects?
Certainly. So if I can split the question up, so there's noise controls, and noise controls are often nowhere near those numbers you're talking about. So for noise controls, often making sure you can shut the windows and you've got ventilation is sufficient.
Yep.
So for noise controls, we're not talking about those high costs. For vibration controls, there can be high costs. Under the vibration alert layer, there are no requirements on any household, so there are no requirements to incur that cost. So the alert layer does not result in any cost on any building. If somebody chooses to achieve a vibration criterion in a house, and it does need to be base isolated, then the rule of thumb that I used to work on a lot of rail vibration in the United Kingdom, it was about 10% of the building cost. So that's the ballpark $100,000. It could be in the right order. I would qualify that by saying that base isolating a building is the backstop answer. So if you're looking at a site and you're trying, the first thing you can try and do is try and pull your sensitive spaces away from the railway as best you can, and then you can look at different foundation designs, and sometimes you find whether you've got a piled or a raft foundation can alter the vibration entering the building. So only once you've gone through standard building constructions, which will incur significant extra cost, would you then, if you're dead set on putting your super sensitive space next to your vibration generating rail in close proximity, and you turn to the base isolation, then it would be a significant cost, and that would vary substantially between different buildings, such you can't. It would be misleading to sort of put a specific figure on that, which is why I say it is a significant sum, but I can't give a closer number.
Okay, so that would, in terms of what you've said in your 5.3, would the 10% of the building cost or something like that, would that be dealing with the most significant adverse effects, or does that get your adverse effects down to a low level of adverse effect?
So in my 5.3, I talk about building location, design and systems. So if your planning is completely blind to the rail noise and vibration, and you just shove your sensitive spaces hard up against the rail, then you'll incur more costs. But in my 5.3, I'm saying if you look at your site and you design according to the environmental conditions on that site, and you pull the sensitive spaces away, you face them away from the rail, then you'd be able to address them in a more reasonable way, and you'd hopefully avoid that base isolation.
So when you talk about sensitive spaces, can you just maybe relate that to a typical residential home, what that might be?
So it's the habitable spaces. So it's the bedrooms and the living rooms. So not the laundries and the garages and the bathrooms and so forth. I'm asking these questions just to try and get a feel. So if you have this overlay, for want of a better word, and somebody buys or some land or buys a house already developed, and they're looking, buys some land and wants to develop a home. If they see this as overlay in terms of noise and vibration, what is that? What is the rough cost of what it would cost them to
to ameliorate the adverse effects. So you're saying something in around that 10%.
If they can't arrange the building on the site differently, but that's not the cost of the overlay. So the overlay does not impose any cost on the vibration overlay would not impose any cost on any landowner. It does not change the vibration exposure. So the vibration exposure that they will experience exists whether or not the overlay is there. The overlay helps them in the fact that it alerts them to the fact there might be that exposure, and then they can make a choice as to whether they want to continue with that site and potentially incur a cost, or whether they feel that they look at a different site.
Yeah, I think you've answered my question. Thank you.
Just I guess a tangential question, Dr. Charles. Is there any intention to bring any of this material in through the building code?
As far as I'm aware, there is nothing on the MB's program at the moment. So I personally was involved 10 years ago drafting provisions for the then Department of Building and Housing, but they fell off their work program. So there was work done 20 years ago to introduce them, and it fell off, and then 15, and then 10 or whatever it is. But as far as I'm aware at the moment, there's no intention to introduce these things.
And was that work in this specific area, or just more broadly?
There was the work. It was, so it's not secret. There was consultation and so forth. So the work, there was specific work done for rail noise insulation in buildings as part of a range of other things that MB were looking. And it wasn't, the work wasn't stopped because the need wasn't demonstrated or through consultation. It was simply the political priorities at the time that it didn't make the cut.
Yeah, understand those sort of matters. Yes, thanks. Thanks, Dr. Charles. Ms. Gunnell, who's next?
So now we're up to Ms. Hebblethwaite, who's the final presenter for KiwiRail.
Good afternoon again, Ms. Hebblethwaite.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and panel. Kia ora koutou, everyone else present. My name is Kath Hebblethwaite. I'm a planning consultant, and I'm here today to assist KiwiRail. I will not read my statement. I'm sure you're capable and have read it previously, and my colleagues have already covered off the key matters and reasons for the submissions that KiwiRail has made, and Dr. Charles has outlined noise and vibration matters. Probably the key item that I just bring to your attention is attachment A to my evidence, which it's on page 15, and that just includes the actual detail of the provisions which we have there. And on page 15, you'll see two options about halfway down the page. Is the first one, preferred option for vibration, and then on the following page, on page 16, you have the alert layer option there. So just to be clear, the alert layer option is KiwiRail's preference, as you've heard from Ms. Grilland and Hancock, and the preferred option is the option which Dr. Charles and I support. So just in case there's any confusion between the two options that I've set out there. Otherwise, I thought there's been a lot of questions, so perhaps Sarah, I'll hand over to yourself and the remainder of the panel to ask questions if that's most helpful.
All right. Sorry. Yes. Well, it's just whilst the panel members are reflecting on the questions to ask you, my earlier comment about structures being included in the setback, your thinking on that?
Yes, so I had a very quick check of the definition of structures in the operative plan. And indeed, it is very broad. I'm sure the council staff can confirm this for you, but I'm just reading off the plan now. It says any building, equipment, device, or other human-made facility which is fixed to land. So
yeah,
that
RMA
is
definition.
That's very broad.
Yeah.
The definition of building, excuse me.
Well, that's in the
I
Building
think-
Act, and that's very broad as well. So I don't think there's any issue as to what the thing is.
Yes, there's a clause B in the
I mean,
council plan definition.
I can't imagine it's the intention of Kiwi Rail to prevent people building small barbecues or having a hen house or something like that in that 5 metres.
No, so I think
And
the
if,
definition
and if it
of
is, there
building,
might be challenged. Yes.
indeed.
Yeah.
So
All
the
right.
definition of building would be adequate.
Yeah.
So just in your evidence statement in paragraph 4, section 4, you're talking about the statutory and higher order planning framework. You reference the Waikato Regional Policy Statement. I'm wondering if that's, and then you've got a whole lot of sub-bullets. I'm wondering if that's correct. Is that just a typo, or are those from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council?
Oh, my apologies. I'm just going to double check that for you, ma'am. I hadn't noticed that. That's very embarrassing. I will just, I'm not going to make you wait to do that. I will confer back in writing. I will just say that myself and the KiwiRail team have had a very high number of these to deal with across the country, and I'm going to suggest that's a typo. Ms. Gunnell might be able to check that while I am answering other questions. You can probably see me blushing on the camera. I apologize for that.
That's okay. I just was wondering, is it a typo in terms of the name, or is it more substantive than that, in that it actually includes the Waikato Regional Policy Statement policies, in which case that section of your evidence would need significant amendment?
That is correct. If it turns out that it is the Waikato Regional Policy Statement provisions, I will be sure to provide an updated supplementary statement addressing the Bay of Plenty RPS.
Thank you. Let's check my questions. No, I do recall I put a couple of questions to the earlier witness, and she referred them over to you, but I'm sorry, I didn't write down those questions as I was flicking them over, so I don't know whether or not you recall them.
I did make a note
yes.
of a question about LIMS and GIS. Was that yourself or one of the other commissioners?
Yes. Yep, that was one of them. And then the number of properties affected. So the number of properties affected by the setback, and whether and the extent to which that would reduce MDRS being available on those sites.
Okay, so I'll deal with the LIMS and GIS first. I would agree with Ms. Gunnell's comments that it is more useful to have the layer in the alert layer, vibration alert layer, in the actual district plan. My experience, as with Ms. Gunnell's, is that councils frequently, if not always, attach the district plan maps to a LIM, and therefore there is a much higher probability of a property owner being aware of the potential risk or that the rail line could pose in terms of vibration. So I would agree with Ms. Gunnell's comments on that. In terms of numbers of properties, might just step back a moment. You would have heard Ms. Grilland-Hancock refer to a project KiwiRail is working on with regard to a Section 32 analysis of the impact of building setbacks. That is something which I've been engaged with KiwiRail to assist with, along with another consultant who's a chartered professional engineer and an expert in, excuse me, I just need to read this. She's an expert in management guidance to incorporate human-orientated safety and design systems. So she isn't appearing as a witness here today, but the pair of us have been working on establishing appropriate setbacks, and the diagrams you saw attached to Ms. Grilland-Hancock's evidence are some preliminary findings from that. The next stage in that report, we can't present that today. It's simply not finished. Therefore, I'm not really referring to it as something you can rely on, but more as explanatory information to get to the point of answering your question. The next stage of once the setback is confirmed, and that is fairly well complete, as you could see from Ms. Grilland-Hancock's diagrams, is then to have an economic analysis undertaken of what the actual impact is in terms of design capabilities and what the effects are of that setback. Prior to that being available, as I mentioned, I have been assisting Kiwi Rail in a range of other jurisdictions, and this is quite a common question. Where there is a small and confined area proposed for upzoning, and an example I will give you is the evidence I provided for Waipa, which we can share with you afterwards, where there's a very confined area adjacent to the rail. It is possible, and I did provide an estimate of numbers of properties which may be able to be developed in a greenfield site relative to the densities provided for. And my findings there, it was a relatively small sample, but my findings there were compared with the number of sites that particularly the NDRS provisions overall enabled, the areas impacted by the yard setback were very minor and relatively inconsequential in terms of impact on overall housing supply. I would caveat that by saying the Waipa example, which I'm not an expert in housing economics, and the Waipa example I used was one very large site, but it was a single site, and I had other development concepts to rely on in order to estimate the number of dwellings or number of sites which may be available. But I'm happy to share the evidence from Waipa if it's not easily accessible. It's on the council website, so you can have a look at that if you wished. But as for actual numbers for Tauranga, I'm just not in a position to provide those at this point.
Do you think that's information we need if we're trying to assess whether a qualifying matter should be put in place, and we're mindful of to the extent it should only reduce capacity to the extent necessary, and has a full, I guess, do we have evidence about a full cost and benefit analysis of imposing a setback at either 2.5 or 5 metres, and do we need that before we can accept that as a qualifying matter?
Ms. Gunnell may be better placed to respond to that in regards to the technicalities of the particular provisions. Based on the analysis I've done so far, it's a small number of the overall capacity. Do you need it? It would be beneficial to have more information. It's always beneficial to have extra information.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question relating to your 7.2 in your evidence, and you referred to the matter of where the offset is measured from, whether it's from the rail corridor, rail network, or have you had a chance to discuss that further with council, and to what effect does it impact on what we are trying to consider today?
No, we haven't discussed it further with council. We did have a useful meeting, as it says in my evidence, after the section 42A report was submitted, and we did offer to provide some more information, but that was going to be in the form of evidence briefs submitted in other jurisdictions, which, as you can imagine, are fairly consistent with what we've presented here. We'd be happy to have those discussions. I think there will be a reasonably significant difference in opinion, or difference in outcome between the two approaches sought. The 6 metres, which council has calculated, takes into account land owned by Kiwi Rail. As far as I understand the assessment, which has been completed by council staff, and you've heard Ms. Gwillinton-Hancock indicate that reliance on Kiwi Rail land is not a desirable outcome for safety reasons. So in that regard, there's quite a change between relying on the rail corridor being the tracks versus the rail designation boundary, which is the edge of the designation, and usually but not always coincides with Kiwi Rail's land ownership.
So that was the sort of second question in terms of trying to understand, are there circumstances in Tauranga where the actual designation extends beyond Kiwi Rail's land holding?
I would need for a property specialist at Kiwi Rail to confirm that.
Okay, because that's what we've heard various pieces of evidence which talk about the rail corridor and a designation, but I still haven't got a clear view as to whether that actually coincides with the Kiwi Rail's property boundary or whether it is more extensive.
The rule I'm seeking to include, and Ms. Wellington-Hancock can comment momentarily, applies from the designation boundary, and the reason for that is that that is a mapped layer in the district plan, and it's very easily identified by plan users. Land ownership can vary from different places, whereas I'd much prefer for plan interpretation it to be a certain mapped layer. There's also a public process to go through should that designation boundary, or generally public, should the designation boundary be moved. Michelle, do you want to comment further on the question about ownership?
Sure. So in Tauranga, the KiwiRail land ownership matches the designation boundaries.
Thank you. And perhaps we could hear from council staff in terms of this difference of a view in terms of where these distances have been measured at a later stage as to whether that has what significance that has, whether it has been measured from the railway line, or the extent of the railway line, or the actual extent of the corridor.
And just on the matter, just return to the matter of your 4.0D and the question of the regional policy statement and which one's which. I don't want to put you to any unnecessary work. Perhaps the first thing that you could do in looking at that is whether in actual fact that amending that or incorporating correct objectives and policies makes any difference to where you end up. And if it doesn't, then the easiest thing to do is simply to excise that part of your evidence rather than create more new evidence. So let me provide you with that shortcut option.
Just to jump in here, sir, I have checked in the meantime, and our sincere and utter apologies. It is Waikato, and I can only reiterate Ms. Hepplethwaite's reasoning that we have done a lot of these recently.
Don't worry. No, we don't need an explanation for that. That's fine. We understand the prospects of mistakes, but given the fact that you're ending up with a 5 metre setback and a layer. I would suggest to you that even the correct policies aren't going to actually make much difference to that outcome.
Yes, certainly, sir. And we have, again, apologies, because we did get it right for Western Bay of Plenty, which was a couple of weeks ago. So we actually conveniently have the Bay of Plenty regional policy statement provisions, which we can easily provide. It won't surprise you that they are not dissimilar to the Waikato Regional Policy Statement. There's reinforcing of protecting infrastructure and also health and safety and reverse sensitivity mentioned. So I agree, sir, that that the actual impact of replacing the Bay of Plenty provisions is not going to make a material difference. But just to reinforce that the Bay of Plenty Regional Policy Statement has similar sentiments to Waikato.
Thank you for that. I'm just trying to avoid the need for council to then respond to the responded statement of evidence. So let's cut the tape if we can.
And sir, if I may, I might take this opportunity just to respond to the costs and benefits comment. So I guess it is a challenging analysis to undertake, and as Ms. Hepplethwaite said, we do have an economist who will be looking at it. But as you can imagine, there are a wide variety of factors, and it depends on the type of activity, depends on the behaviour of developers. Some developers may automatically pull development back from a railway corridor, and so the actual impact to that developer is actually nil because they would have done it anyway. The topography of the site, the geotechnical constraints may mean that would have been done anyway, and so trying to factor in the actual cost to a developer between looking at a 2.5 metre to a 5 metre setback it is quite hard to say without actually doing any sort of market consultation or absolute walking around a site and saying where would you put a house here. And I guess just to stress that the qualifying matter is the safe and efficient operation of nationally significant infrastructure, and KiwiRail strongly believes that having those buildings right up against that boundary will have a material impact on KiwiRail's ability to actually operate its rail network, which is nationally significant infrastructure. And so the health and safety of people being able to maintain their buildings is a crucial consideration. But in terms of the words of the Act, it is that focus on can that nationally significant infrastructure safely and efficiently operate without interference. So yeah, that would be my thoughts on that analysis.
I guess just one follow on. Do we need any of that analysis in order to make a determination on the qualifying matter if we're looking at the tests in the Act that we have to consider?
Yeah, so I think you framed it succinctly before. The test is what is reasonable and necessary for that safe and efficient operation of infrastructure. That's the qualifying matter. How much is the density standard able to be reduced? The evidence before you is that without that sufficient setback, is that will be compromised, and the safe and efficient operation of infrastructure in those sections won't be able to be maintained. So I would say I don't think you need a site-by-site analysis of the cost to a developer. That the primary focus is on can that rail network be operated without the setback.
And your submission to us is, and that's a 5 metre setback, not a 2.5. So we don't need to worry about what the difference between 2.5 and 5 is.
Yes, that would be my submission.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kiwi Rail. Appreciate that.
Thank you for your time, panel.
I think I recognise the people at the end of the table. The question is, which one are you going to speak, or which party are you speaking to first?
So this is on behalf of JWL Investments Trust. And sir, there was 3 witnesses for JWL Investments. That's Aaron Collier, who's beside me, Fraser Colgrove, who should be online, yes, and then Mr. Dean Waddell, who's a trustee of JWL Investments Trust. He unfortunately can't be here today, so I'm not sure if the panel has any questions for him, but if you'd like to put those in writing, we could certainly get those to him and ask him to respond. So apologies for that he's unable to be here.
Well, thank you for that. And the invitation to put it in writing probably answers the question, doesn't it?
All right. Sir, because there's been some movement by the staff in the Section 42A report to some of the matters, and just because it may be that the issues now that the committee has with this matter may be quite narrow, my suggestion is that I'll lead with Mr. Collier and give him his planning evidence, and then what may arise out of questions to him, I will then address through my legal submissions. So we're doing it a little bit differently than usual, but just because I'm not sure how many legal issues will arise, in fact, from the submissions I've already filed. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, Commissioners, and good afternoon, Council staff. You have a copy of my evidence, and what I have produced for you today is really just a summary of the outstanding matters. I'm sorry I don't have a hard copy of that for you yet, but I will provide that to you because it does have a number of footnotes there that refer to specific matters that I address you on. In terms of this afternoon, there are really 2 key sites that my evidence focuses on, and I'll just sort of describe those for you so you understand where they are. The first is a site known as the Northern Quarter, which is a site directly behind you down in the CBD, which is bordered by Willow Street, Harrington Street, and Hamilton Street. And it's effectively that whole block with the exception of a couple of properties along the waterfront that JWL doesn't own. And the second site is the Gatepar Town Centre site, which is sitting within the Gatepar and Cameron Road corridor under the spatial plan, and the JWL site in terms of that is between the Mitre 10 site at the very sort of southern end and the supermarket site at the northern end, and I've referred to that in my evidence as the Gatepar Town Centre. there's some debate and discussion amongst the economists around whether that's a town centre or not, but that's what I've referred to it as.
Sorry, just to clarify, does it include the Mitre 10? It extends from the
That's the extent of the gate of the
so it includes
ownership.
Mitre 10.
That's
yes.
the extent of the ownership. There's some debate between myself and the planners around whether the Mitre 10 site should be included in the MBRS provisions or not.
Yeah.
But I'll address you on that in my evidence.
But the ownership includes
the ownership is, yes.
Thank you.
Firstly, just turning to the city centre zone and the height area F, which is identified on the maps as applying to the Northern Quarter site. I don't agree with the analysis which has been included in the rebuttal evidence in relation to the building height over that area F, and the reference in that further council report as to the height being somewhat of a judgment call. The approach taken is to apply a height of 16 metres to that site, which ignores the consented environment, and that consent, or those consents, is a bundle of consents, I note have been given effect to.
Can I just check with you that that bundle of consents covers the entirety of Area F?
It covers all of the area F that's owned by JWL.
Yes, but it doesn't cover the entire area of Area F.
No, that's correct. It's just the JWL site.
So what portion or rough proportion of Area F is covered by JWL's holdings?
In terms of the northern block, it's probably about 80% of the northern block. So there are 4 other blocks that come further towards you from the end of the strand. So their block is just the block bordered by Hamilton and Harrington Street. And the only site they don't own is one in this very corner. So if you're looking along the strand, it's in the sort of to the southernmost corner, which is a bar that's separate. They do own the Lone Star building, which is further to the north. So the approach which has been taken is to apply a height of 16 metres, which ignores the consented environment, which has been given effect to, and you'll see that if you do a site visit, and attempts to introduce a qualifying matter largely on the basis of shading over the waterfront area. And I've noted in my evidence that that's also an area that's zoned commercial. The reporting planner suggests that because the Strand waterfront is commercial rather than a reserve or open space, that the qualifying matter can be applied under Section 70(J) of the Amendment Act, and that refers specifically to any other matter that makes higher density development as provided for by Policy 3, as the case requires, inappropriate in an area, but only if Section 77R is satisfied. In terms of Section 77R, this requires that the council justifies the specific characteristics that make the level of urban development required inappropriate, and justifies why characteristics make that level of urban development inappropriate in light of the MPS in terms of the national significance of urban development and the objectives of the MPSUD, and in terms of D, which includes a site-specific analysis that firstly identifies the site. Secondly, there's an evaluation required with specific characteristics on a site-specific basis to determine the geographical area where intensification needs to be compatible with the specific matter. And thirdly, there's a requirement for an evaluation of an appropriate range of options to achieve the greatest height and density provided for by Policy 3 while managing the specific characteristics. In my opinion, there's been no analysis in relation to an appropriate range of options to achieve the greatest heights and densities provided for under Section 77(R)(3). The council has proposed that Area F be restricted to 16 metres across the adjacent block, whilst the city centre zone immediately behind Area F has no height restriction, and neither does the council-owned land further to the north. The report accepts in 9.18.3 that there was no Section 32 analysis to restrict height in Area F, and identifies that this analysis to fill the gap is included in Appendix 11. In my view, Appendix 11 provides no further Section 32 analysis, as it does not deal with the JWL site. Despite Policy 3A applying, there has been no impact on the loss of development capacity assessed, as this was suggested to be not practicable. As this has not been assessed, I do not agree that the Section 32 analysis could conclude that the 16 metres is an efficient and effective outcome. And I note there that they'd be easily able to accommodate an extra 3 to 4 levels on top of the buildings that are already consented on the site. Appendix 12 instead provides shading analysis, but is of little use as it has not incorporated the effects of either the permitted scheduled site area shown in figure 8 of my evidence, and that refers to the Appendix 17M diagram, which is a 34.8 metre permitted building height along the northern corner of the JWL site. And that scheduled site permits a tower in that location of up to 38.79 metres. In addition, the shading analysis also ignored the existing resource consent building heights, which range from 20 metres at the front through to a stepped approach of 30 metres at the back of the site. So the shading analysis, in my view, is very difficult to interpret as it is not accurate for the reasons that I've noted. My conclusions on this are that the shading difference could be somewhere between 1.5 and half an hour, but it could also be less given the impact of the scheduled site, depending on the time of the year. Because the JWL building is located on the southwest side of the Strand, my view is that this impact is not significant. No other matters in Section 77.0 apply, as the area over which the shading analysis has been undertaken is largely road, rail line, and currently car parking. The extent of the shading analysis does not, in my opinion, adversely affect the wider area, which may be, although commercial zoned and owned by the council, earmarked for future open space. This includes, in particular, the waterfront edge and the coastal margin, which is likely to be developed. The option of JWL simply being able to apply for a consent and that they are somehow fortunate that the activity status changes from discretionary to restricted discretionary activity is not, in my view, an appropriate response to Policy 3A of the MPSUD. The status quo of 16 metres does not, in my view, meet the test under Section 77R3, which requires the evaluation of a range of options to achieve the greatest heights and densities provided for by Policy 3, whilst managing the specific characteristics. These options would at least include a stepped height or height in line with JWL's existing resource consents. Turning now to the second matter.
And just before you go there, I mean, it just occurs to me, I mean, one of the simple options from JWL's point of view would be to wrap A into your particular block, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
That's the simplest solution to that one, unless you're arguing on behalf of all of Area F. And I wasn't quite sure whether that's where you were arguing or not.
No, our submission is only in respect of JWL.
That's what I thought. So, I mean, that's the simplest response.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so I would note that there's no submissions seeking from that Area F. And most of Area F, other than the JWL site, from memory, it was either been developed by JWL already, that the building on the corner with, is that low?
It's a bar, there's a bar on the corner.
Or it's already been developed. So there's very little development actually left in F, in the same way that JWL is currently going through consents and is going through concept drawings. So being able to enable greater height is very important for them.
Just finish that off. There's no view shaft or anything going through that corner?
No, there's no view shaft and there's also no sunlight admission to public places, which are identified separately in the plan. And that's part of the reason why the original submission was made.
There is noted in the Section 42A report the airport approach path that affects the site, but that's very high. I think it's 39 metres from memory.
And that applies to the entire city effectively at that end. So, and turning now to the gate par pocket.
I wonder whether it's easier to ask another question now, because I think I've managed to reading your evidence and listening, managed to confuse myself entirely about heights. So F at the moment in the ADP has what height limit? Is 16 at the moment?
There's a 16 metre area over part of the site. and then there's a specific scheduled site that's sitting along the northern boundary of the site, which is a block within the site, and that has a total height of 38.7 metres RL. So it's effectively a 16 metre with a tower block sitting in the middle of it.
And in terms of all those heights we're hearing, because I think some say RL and others don't, and whatever, are they all being measured from the same place, or are they? In terms of above ground level, what does it mean? Because that's what the 16 is, isn't it?
The 16 metres is above existing ground level. The 38.7 metres in the diagram is an RL relative to Motoriki. Relative to the new datum, and previously was relative to Motoriki. So the site's sitting at about RL 5 metres above sea level.
So effectively, from ground level, it's a 33. Yeah. And then the heights you were quoting for the consented development, where were they measured from?
So they're measured from ground level, and at the front, if you look at the front half of the site, that's approximately 20 metres, and the second half of the site is approximately 30 metres. So you have a sort of a stepped approach up.
So the only odd one out is the tower in terms of where.
Yeah, and the tower is sitting there as effectively a high-rise portion within the site.
And then that other area A, that's again measured from ground level. The height for A. Area A was a separate area.
That's an unlimited height, is my understanding.
Oh,
of
okay.
area.
So it doesn't matter.
So that's immediately to the further to the north.
That's right. And you said about shading. Yeah. Thanks.
And the Appendix 17A drawing, which is included in all the evidence, shows those various bits of land and the other drawings that I've referred to.
Thank you.
So turning now to the Gate Pa and Pukehinahina site, which relates to height and the extent of Plan Change 33. There are two parts to the Pukehinahina Gate Pa site, and perhaps I also have to declare to you that I'm also assisting the Pukehinahina Trust with the resource consents for the National Land Wars Museum. And I don't know whether you've heard from anyone today on that, but Mr. Makari...
Yes, just before lunch.
Okay, Mr. Makari unfortunately is in France and was unable to...
He doesn't think that's unfortunate at all. I know that.
Yes, I probably agree with you, sir. But just in terms of dealing with the western side of the road, and that's where the tennis court area is, there seems to be some confusion in the Section 32 analysis in relation to the permitted building height in relation to that. And effectively, the submission that you've received from Ngāi Tamarawahau, which is the Tauranga Moana hapu that has mana whenua over that site, is seeking a view shaft on that western side. And if you go out there and do a site visit, it's very easy to look at where that view shaft is. When you stand in the car park, it's effectively framed, if you like, between a Norfolk pine and a large pūtakawa tree. And so you can see that on site. But there's been some confusion around the permitted baseline and the 9 metres. And certainly Mr. Makari and myself have had a number of meetings with the council staff on site to discuss that. The approach seems to have been the council have applied a 9 metre permitted height and then an additional 2 metres above that. So it's effectively become an 11 metre permitted building height, and that takes into account a 2 metre permitted building intrusion provision that's sitting in the plan. But I just note there that the permitted building intrusions are to provide for things like aerials and the ends of parapets and the like. And in my experience, they don't blanket out entire landscapes and never have done. And I don't think you'd find any examples of that within the city where you've got a permitted intrusion applying and you've effectively lost a wider view through the landscape. So I just think that the impact of that permitted intrusion has been a little over emphasised in the analysis that's been completed. Turning to the eastern side, and that's the side that, or the side of Cameron Road that JWL owns, the heritage protection plan area that was proposed is no longer being pursued, as I understand it, in response to my evidence and also the submissions from JWL. and the council rebuttal evidence identifies some proposed amendments which are apparently supposed to be provided in the council's closing statement. I'm not sure exactly what those are going to be because I haven't had the opportunity to see those or comment further on those. But what I would say is that having worked with Ngāi Tamarawahau over a number of years, and that involvement started way back with Plan Change 26, which was subsequently withdrawn, it has been agreed on site, and there's been a number of discussions over a number of years, effectively of excluding the Mitre 10 building from the Plan Change 33 and prior to that the Plan Change 26 area. And so the Mitre 10 building was consented historically with agreement and a cultural impact assessment from Ngāi Tamarawahau. And so we have agreed on site that that would be the appropriate way of providing a buffer between what is a significant heritage site nationally and the influences and impacts of Plan Change 33. So the Mitre 10 itself would sit outside of the Plan Change 33 process. And in addition to that, what has been agreed with Ngāi Tamarawahau is that the council would provide some further landscape planting along the common boundary between the Mitre 10 wall and the fencing and the reserve, and that JWL will also protect the sight lines from the battle site by effectively putting a covenant across the front of the Mitre 10 Garden Centre. Now, I know that's outside of this process, but I just wanted to explain to you that that's where JWL have got to with the hapu over a number of years in terms of discussions, particularly with Mr. Makairi.
What's the zoning, the operative zoning of the Mitre 10 site?
It's commercial.
It's commercial.
So the entire centre is commercial.
I'm just thinking about the process we're going through and what the national planning standards expect, etc. Is it the appropriate mechanism to exclude Mitre 10, or should it be included in an overlay put over it?
Well, there's an overlay that was proposed in the original provisions. I suppose what I'm saying to you is it's been agreed between Ngāi Tamarawahau that Mitre 10 would not be developed for residential, and there would never be apartments or anything overlooking the battle site. So I believe that there would be the potential for you to sleeve it by leaving that out of Plan Change 33. Beyond that, in my view, the approach in terms of the application of Plan Change 33 and the 27 metre building height beyond that buffer is supported on the basis of the landscape and visual assessment that was completed by Boffa Miskell. And Boffa Miskell did analysis in relation to a further 22 metre building height and then a 27 metre building height, and looked at the effects of both, and effectively there was no difference between the two. The third matter I wanted to address you on was just the Te Papa spatial plan. And in terms of the spatial plan, the evidence of Mr. Colgrave has addressed why he considers that the Gate Pa town centre is a town centre rather than a local centre. And I'd just like to refer you to, and it's included in my summary here, which I'll send you a copy of, diagram 15, which is a commercial centres network hierarchy, which was proposed to be deleted from the plan. And that shows and identifies Gate Pa actually as a large format retail centre. So that's somewhere between a local centre and a town centre. But I just thought it was important that you were aware of that hierarchy plan. And that's a centre that's not identified in the national planning standards. And so Mr. Colgrave will address you on that further. What is important, I think, is that that map was produced some time ago, even prior to the full development of the existing Gate Pa Centre. And I think it's also fair to say that there's been a very high level of change which has occurred along that corridor, and which is expected to continue to occur along that corridor from the spatial planning influences which have been outlined in the Te Papa spatial plan, in which I've set out in my evidence. And that includes effectively a whole lot of further residential intensification around the centre, a transport hub along Cameron Road and what have you. And then finally, the only other matter that I wanted to address you on was the city and commercial zone activity status, and that's in terms of both the general commercial zone and the city centre. The council no longer proposes to require consent for buildings and activities in the commercial and city centre zone as a restricted discretionary activity. And I agree with those changes, and that they're largely, I suspect, in relation to the Waikanae decision. So thank you. I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Just on that, I think you referred to it as the large format retail centre. Is that how you refer to it? Because there is under the planning standard large format retail zone. So
is it? Sorry,
there is. Mr. Collier is correct that it sits in the colours or in the table as between town centres and local centres. It appears, if you take the guidance of the national planning standards, they've got like a colour coded list. So that it is distinct. It does have a national planning standard. It does say that it's supposed to address commercial. The way that I read, it's another one of those, is it a hierarchy? Is it a network? It's a philosophical question. But it does identify a large format centre to sit somewhere between a town centre and a local centre, which is effectively consistent with the evidence of Mr. Cosgrove and Mr. Collier that this is a centre that's in transition under that large format centre zoning, is going from one to the other. So looking to the future, that it should be identified as town centre.
Yes, I've actually, in thinking this through, I'd agree with that. I think the confusion was there's nothing in the NPSUD that deals with that centre. It's not the national planning standard, it's actually the NPSUD that leaves it out. Yes. So you've got town centre and then local centre, but nothing in between. So it's not the it's not the national planning standard, it's the NPSUD.
Yes. It's table 19 in the mapping standard.
That's fine, yes. I mean, no one in the right mind would think of putting accommodation into a large format retail zone. That's right. We better hear from Mr. Colgrave in that case, hadn't we?
Yes.
One question, and in your 3.4, you talk about the unusual terminology, downgrading from town centre to local centre. What is your concern about that downgrade? What is the issue? How is it significant?
Well, it doesn't align at all with the spatial planning process that's occurred. So the council seems to has gone through an extensive spatial planning process, identified Gate Pa as a town centre, has done a whole lot of planning around that in the context of the spatial plan, and then through this process has said, well, we don't think it's a town centre anymore, we're going to downgrade it. And I just don't understand, if it's a large format retail centre under the hierarchy document, I don't know, and this is supposed to be a forward-looking exercise that we're looking at here in terms of the future, how you go from effectively what is a town centre or a large format retail centre back to a local centre when you have based all of your planning on a spatial plan that identifies it as a town centre and expects that level of growth to occur around it.
I recognise that, but in terms of from a city plan perspective, what is the impact?
The impact is that it might downgrade the level of that centre and might affect the potential for reinvestment, and then you might find that you don't actually get the development occurring in it and around it that you're anticipating under your spatial plan.
So it's not so much an issue in terms of what might flow in the district plan, but it's more in terms of the ability to market it and to develop it.
Yeah, in terms of the spatial plan, it is, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just had one question there, and it's just I'm not across the detail of the different spatial plans, but does the the relevant spatial plan identify Gate Pa as a town centre now or at some point in the future? I just know other spatial plans in other regions and that have timeframes linked to when they would achieve that status, and wondered if that was similar here.
It identifies it now, so all of the drawings that are in there, all the diagrams, all of the words refer to it as a town centre. Not a future town centre, but a town centre.
we move on to Mr. Cox?
Sir, if we could
Thank you.
just add Mr. Colgrave if he's online.
Yes. Hello.
So today we can hear you but not see you, and the other day we could see you but not hear you. Yes.
I'm unmuted at this end, sir.
Muted.
In theory.
Well, we have a delightful graphic that we're looking at, but you carry on. We can certainly hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present today. I don't propose to read anything out or give you a summary per se. I guess I just want to touch on the key issue from my perspective, which is really about that sort of town centre, local centre definition. Just picking up from Mr. Collier's comment, my concern, I guess, is not so much what it means in terms of the PC33 process, but really about setting an expectation about what the centre might be considered in subsequent processes where the council is turning its mind to the zoning or rezoning of commercial areas. So I think there's a danger that if we allow the local centre tag to have a life through this process, that it will continue on beyond it, and that it could potentially cloud perceptions of the role, function and potential of the area in future. So I think that's really where the issue is in terms of all this. I've just been having a quick look through the spatial plan as my esteemed colleagues have been giving you their views. And yeah, it certainly is referred to as a town centre extensively through the document. But it's also one of a handful of places in the Te Papa area which is identified as a priority area as well. And it has a wellbeing plan. So there's really a lot of work in the spatial plan that talks about the potential for this area to become a lot more than it is today. So that's the sort of view that I have. Mr. Heath has provided a very short rebuttal statement where he continues to consider that it's a local centre, not a town centre. And I respectfully point out that the points that he's raised in terms of deeming it a local centre are very much based on what it looks like now. So it's very much stuck in today, whereas we all understand that it's a forward-looking exercise, and the key output from the first conferencing session that we had was the fact that you need to have a forward-looking view. Mr. Heath's initial work was looking at the current role and function. After that first conferencing session, he was engaged to go and do a second piece of work looking at the future roles and function. But when he's come to do his rebuttal statement in relation to this, the comments he's made are all about how it looks and feels today. So I think that it's really important that we take that forward-looking view.
No, thank you. And it's good to be able to hear and see you.
It's great to be
significant improvement.
I could not hear a single thing the other day, so it was. I only knew I was on when everyone started staring at me. But thank you very much.
We could.
I won't comment that your answers reflected that point, but
yes,
we can see your frustration.
Yeah, no, fine. It's very clear. Holgrave, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cosgrove. I even got an email over the weekend. He was so nervous about appearing today. I said, it's all right, it's a different venue.
Thank you.
So, Commissioners, in terms of my legal submissions, I think they're relatively self-explanatory, and I know you're sort of a bit behind already this afternoon, so I don't want to waste your time and read them out. I think Mr. Collier has summarised the key remaining issues. Obviously, the status of the Gate Pass Centre, consideration as to whether the committee thinks that the MITRE 10 site should be included in the town centre, and the implications of that for JWL in terms of the overlay of the objectives and policies on cultural matters and the impacts of that. And then the third matter relating to the CBD site and the consents that it's got. In terms of the centre itself, we're relying heavily on the evidence of Mr. Cosgrove. Obviously, you've got two competing economists on that, but we're relying on the extensive work done through the spatial plan to support the definition of the centre. And just note that even now in the operative plan for the last 15 years, it's been identified as something else entirely, but a large format. And just picking up on that, and it will be included actually in the Blue Haven legal opinion, which I'm hoping to get to you tonight. that it's not specifically a lot in the district plan around these maps, that's acknowledged. But as not wanting to ruin the punchline, but in my legal opinion, in terms of the principles of Waikanae and what this plan does, and the underlying reliance on that by the public, what gets invested around it, how banks look at it for funding, how you look at future, it has quite significant implications for everyone involved, including, for example, funding from other crowning agencies. So it's quite an important matter. And so in my submission, the principles of Waikanae should also apply. In terms of the aspect around the Pukehinahina site and the relationship with that, as noted by Mr. Collier, it's difficult for this hearings panel in terms of looking at that, but it would be fair to say that there's quite strong agreements and relationships between the two of them and understandings around what that means in terms of JWL's support for the museum site and the interrelationship between the two. They have a specific contractual undertaking around that site that addresses it in terms of height and other matters. So Mr. Collier's view is that keeping it out of the Plan Change 33 will keep it at the height that it is anyway, and addresses those issues in terms of the pragmatics of it without the overcomplications of the objectives and policies and overlay.
Just a question on that. You said it's a contractual undertaking. Is there anything on the title which restricts it in terms of covenants and things?
Not to my knowledge, and I'm not even privy to the commercial agreement between them, so I couldn't even comment further. It's just my understanding. It's been a pretty long-term relationship between those two, because Mr. Waddell has been part of that site for what, close to 20 years? 20 years now. So the third thing relates to the CBD site, and I think Mr. Collier has covered that very well. I just wanted to comment just on, when I looked through the Section 42A report and the statement there where it said that Area F was almost like it should have undergone a Section 32 evaluation requirement and hadn't. When I looked at that, I also saw that Area A wasn't covered either in terms of the map and that evaluation, and that had just gone to unlimited, and it may be somewhere that I didn't pick up, but in that report and what was there and not there, it appeared that Area A went to unlimited and Area F was left off. JWL would support the concept that the JWL site sat with the Area A in terms of both reflecting the existing consents and the fact that it is specifically sought relief to which others in that block have not, and the fact it sits so closely in alignment to the Area A, which is subject to future development, and where the two sit, and so would support that. And I just rely on the evidence of Mr. Collier around the other aspects to which there are some quite strong limitations in the evidence that the council is relying on to justify Area F, in terms of that there's no qualifying matter around sunlight admission that appears, and if such was to follow, it would seem to me that there was an obligation that was done in a more comprehensive manner across all the sites, not just the one Area F, and that the whole waterfront has those same aspects and elements. So in terms of the evidence that is there, in my submission, it isn't sufficient to justify it not being included through policy 3A for city centres, and doesn't fit within the anticipated QMs nor in the general QM in terms of evidence provided.
Just clarify, you said there you would support it sitting within Area A. Is that just the JWL site or the whole northern block? Just wanting to be clear on what you're suggesting there.
In my submission, it would logically fit over the northern quarter, even though JWL does own, and some's already been recently developed. It's that northern quarter where you've got the substantial redevelopment either occurring, has occurred, or is about to occur on the council site, probably in the near to medium future. It's effectively the summary of.
No other questions on JWL? And I think you're going to address us on the other two, I think, Hamoana and Urban Task Force, is that right, according to a note I've got?
I'm not involved in those, so Mr. Collier is
Oh.
going to have to address those directly.
Okay. Right.
Yes, sir, I was.
And my note says it will take less than 2 minutes. Was that added at your request or mine?
Certainly, so the Hamoana one may. Mr. Adams was going to attend on behalf of the.
Being behind you.
Oh, he is here. Okay. I'm happy to go through the Hamoana.
Yeah. The Urban Task Force will take how long? I'm just passing for afternoon tea.
Well, perhaps if we could deal with the Urban Task Force matter after afternoon tea.
That's fine.
It certainly won't take long.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, after that, we've just got Fonterra at 4 o'clock, so that's plenty of time.
Yeah, so the Hamoana, just by way of background, the Hamoana submission was in relation to a site that sits between, again, it's in the Gate Pass spatial plan area. It sits between 16th and 17th Ave. It's effectively a commercial strip of land that fronts onto Cameron Road and has recently been granted resource consents for a large private hospital up to 5 levels. But one of the issues associated with the submission on Plan Change 33 was really in relation to the activity status, and that's now been resolved through agreement with the council staff in terms of what my submission sought and what they've now accepted in terms of the Waikanae matter around activity status. And the second issue was really in relation to a qualifying matter. So you'll see attached to my evidence some correspondence from the Hamoana's engineers in relation to a floodable area, which is shown on the non-statutory maps. And you'll recall these perhaps from your hearings on Plan Change 27. And really the basis for the submission from Hamoana was that there is no qualifying matter in relation to that floodable area. The flooding doesn't run through the building. The flooding runs around the back of the building, and that was confirmed through the Hamoana resource consent. So we have a situation really with Hamoana where we have a qualifying matter shown, which doesn't exist, and it isn't a qualifying matter. I don't want to perhaps go on about the pros and cons of the non-statutory layer, because we've done that in the context of Plan Change 27, and that's subject to appeals. But I just wanted to raise that with you to say this is an example where the maps are wrong and there is no qualifying matter, and that's been resolved through the resource consent process. So thank you.
No, that's all very clear. Thanks, Ms. Collier. So yeah, we'll take a 15, let's say till, how long do you think Urban Task Force, Fonterra's on at 4?
What is the time, sir? I don't have a watch.
20 past 3.
Oh, 4:30. Oh gosh. No,
well, we won't be long. I mean, a lot of the matters.
You'll have 40 minutes. So that's yes.
No, sir, I can assure you I won't. But feel free to have a longer afternoon tea if you wish, because a number of matters like the Mount Maunganui provisions, the retirement village provisions, we've already been through. So I didn't intend to repeat myself on some of those.
All right, back at 22 in that case. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're in the thrall of our microphones. They keep dying at inopportune moments. So that's right. Welcome, Urban Task Force.
Kia ora koutou, Chairperson Hill, Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Scott Jason Adams. I'm the Chair of Urban Task Force for Tauranga. I've got an MSc in Estate Management from London South Bank and a Bachelor of Management Studies from University of Waikato. I'm also the Managing Director of Caris Properties Limited, based here in Tauranga. Established in 1990, Caris has built more than 9,000 residential sections across 60 developments throughout the North Island, with a further 3,000 approximately lots in the pipeline. The Urban Task Force was incorporated post-COVID, incorporated society with its purpose being to represent members in Tauranga, property professionals and funders, developers, iwi and hapu, accounting firms, legal firms, owners and managers of property in Tauranga in the Western Bay, for the purpose of seeking strong and informed leadership to local authorities, promoting and fostering productive local networks around property and related issues, and to advocate for our industry by making submissions such as today.
I just have a question. How many members does the Urban Task Force have?
Currently 75 members, so about 2,500 individual people within those groups.
Okay. And that's a range of sort of developers, iwi, hapu, etc. So not as corporate members or just as individuals, or just want to clarify?
Yeah, correct. The companies and entities are the members.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Urban Task Force supports Plan Change 33. We also support Western Bay's Plan Change 92 and the Regional Council's Plan Change 6, which all implement the NPSUD. However, we seek a number of amendments to the plan change as set out by Mr. Collier's evidence. Sounds like you've done a few of these to death, so I'll just keep those ones brief. But Tauranga is a growing sub-region. Our community's facing unprecedented challenges here because historically our local leaders have seen growth as a problem rather than an opportunity. So the intent of the UTF is to focus on the opportunities presented by growth, and to unlock these opportunities by working collaboratively and innovatively across central government, local government and private sectors in an urgent manner. So Tauranga has the most severe shortage of zoned and serviced land in New Zealand to provide homes for residents and also spaces for commercial businesses to invest in, which has caused a severe housing affordability issue. So Tauranga obviously has an urgent need for required infrastructure and more affordable housing. Poor growth management has led to a lack of essential community infrastructure and facilities and a lack of investment in utilities infrastructure, which is necessary to support growth. Tauranga, as you're aware, is also non-compliant, as many Tier 1 cities are at the moment, with the NPSUD development capacity requirements, which are set by central government. So the UTF, which is the abbreviation for Urban Task Force, advocates for better connected thinking, connected planning, connected governments, and strong leadership, and central government must play a key role in those connections now. I agree with the suggestions in Mr. Collier's evidence, some of which you've already heard over the last couple of days, that propose a number of changes to the rules and policies which provide a more certain and efficient planning approach to the MDRZ. Firstly, I support Mr. Collier's view that in the city centre zone, buildings and development generally should be provided for as a permitted activity, which was the status quo. My recent experience with buildings in the city centre zone, in discussion with a lot of our members, that this is occurring at scale, and that applicants are employing and will continue to engage urban designers and architects to ensure that that quality buildings are planned. The investments now being made in the CBD is significant, in the tens to hundreds of millions if you include Tauranga City Council's work. The UTF has also met with TCC on several occasions to discuss the new urban design panel, and I fully support the voluntary use of this panel. Great idea. A number of projects proposed for the CBD have been considered by the panel already, and I think the panel's role is important in assessing the development community. The UTF prefers this as a non-statutory approach to urban design guidance to sit outside resource consent requirements as part of being required for resource consents. Slows the whole process up generally. I support the inclusion of Smith's Farm within the MDRZ. This will deliver significant further greenfield housing for the city. The commercial zone also has a significant role to play in terms of mixed use development. And again, I agree with Mr. Collier's evidence that the activity status for residential development in commercial zones must remain permitted. To do otherwise would not be enabling, would be going backwards really, given that both business activities and residential activities are currently permitted in the city plan. And I think we agree we're already way too regulated in this planning space. I think you've done Mount Spatial Plan to death, but so I won't comment on that. We'll just take that as read. Retirement villages, there's a need for further retirement villages to be provided for in the city, and the form of these villages are such that they may take advantage of additional height and density. The UTF have appealed Plan Change 27, flooding from rainfall events. I don't agree that these non-statutory maps, which are largely error-ridden, should be used as a trigger for a qualifying matter until these maps are reviewed, further modelling is undertaken, and they are accurate and reliable. This matter may, however, be ultimately resolved through an Environment Court hearing. So our recommendation is to remove the matter for now, as flooding mitigation is constraining housing supply badly. The UTF has been a strong supporter of growth and revitalisation in the CBD. I support the removal of height limitations in the CBD. This will assist for providing for larger and taller buildings. As previously noted, I advocate for permitted activity status, given that buildings at such a scale involve significant architectural and urban design inputs, both from the developer but also through the use of the urban design panel, resulting in excellent urban design outcomes. So before I hand over to Mr. Collier, I'd be happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. No, all clear where UTF stands on those matters. Thank you. Mr. Collier.
Yes, good afternoon. So the basis of the UTF submission, as you've heard from Mr. Adams, was that the UTF sought a number of amendments based on sound planning policy, and really to ensure through their submission, which I think it's fair to say that was primarily focused on ensuring that Plan Change 92 is consistent with the objectives, policies and requirements of the MPSUD, so that Plan Change 33 became an effective mechanism in terms of achieving the intended outcomes of housing intensification required under the Amendment Act. The original submission sought further enabling and more certain provisions. In particular, there was a couple of key points that were made in the original submission. The main one being that the assessment criteria for restricted discretionary activities for MDRS were narrowed and much more focused. And although I wasn't able to participate because of COVID in those caucusing sessions, I agreed with the provisions that were effectively came out of those sessions.
Mr. Collier, just have a question in terms of, excuse me, 2.2.
Yep.
Plan Change 92, what does that refer to?
Plan Change 92.
It's Western Bay of Plenty District Council's
sorry.
intensification plan change.
That's a typo on my part. That should be plan change 33. Apologies. I've probably been writing about plan change 92 at the time, so
It's not unusual.
it's not. No. I haven't mentioned the Waikato Regional Policy Statement though. So I think it's fair to say that yet most of the matters that we did raise have been addressed. Particularly the standards for restricted discretionary activity housing, the permitted activity status for residential development, and also buildings both within the city centre zone and the commercial zones. And based on the council's reporting, that's consistent with the Waikanae approach. So I don't intend to repeat any of that. But what I would say is that the projects which are now proposed, particularly in those commercial zones, are now at a much larger scale. So I agree with Mr. Adams's comments. Typically, all of those projects are now engaging good quality architects, urban designers, even if they're not required to from a statutory sense. And they also now, a number of them are using the Council's Urban Design Panel, which is a non-statutory method, but which is, I think it's fair to say it's being embraced by the development community. And it's being embraced, I think, more on the basis that it's a non-regulatory approach. So there's no fear of going along to that panel. And so it's a really good approach that TCC have adopted, and it's one which I support.
It's free.
And it's free as well. It is. So I've covered the commercial aspects in terms of the two zones. In terms of Mount Maunganui and building height and density, as I've said to you previously, I don't believe that the mount should be treated any differently than any other residential environments. And really, I suppose the starting point from the Urban Task Force was the initial work that was done by ISMIS, which had identified the potential capacity and capability for additional height in specific locations at the mount. And that was the subject of our original submission, and we still support that in the context of walkable catchments and quality residential outcomes in terms of the NPSUD. Smith's Farm is a matter which the Urban Task Force supported in terms of the rezoning of that. I was involved in the original consenting of it, and I had one suggested amendment really, which was to a matter of restricted discretion relating to stormwater. So one of the things with Smith's Farm, and I'm not sure if Mr. Bellamy has addressed you on Smith's Farm, but the original consenting that was done under the SHA process, NZTA was supposed to have consented effectively the northern end, but they have provided for the mitigation, but it wasn't actually included in their comprehensive consent. So when Smith's Farm goes in for any further consents, if any developers look to rehash effectively the consents that are in place or apply for RMA consents, they will need to address stormwater. So I've made one suggested amendment to the matters of restricted discretion in relation to stormwater, which is in 8.1 of my evidence. And really that is a minor amendment around stormwater management areas and what that protection and enhancement would include. The concern I've got is that there are areas of open space, for example, around Smith's Farm. There are areas adjacent to Smith's Farm, which Smith's Farm has no control over, but which may be involved in the discharge from Smith's Farm. So it was really just clarifying that the protection or enhancement of the on-site stormwater management areas should be the focus of that provision. And then in section 9 of my evidence, I've addressed the issue of retirement villages. As I've said previously, I've never seen any retirement villages that create up to 3 units, but I think that's a technical rule that perhaps I have to live with in terms of the way the plan is set up. I have suggested some additional objectives and policies because the way the retirement villages are dealt with by the council is there are separate assessment criteria. And I was asked the question on Thursday afternoon about those objectives and policies. I still have to go back and just check those. just to make sure that they are aligned or not with the Retirement Village Association. I hope to be able to get that to you in writing in terms of a response to your question about that and the consistency in terms of my wording. And I've also...
They are before us tomorrow, so...
Oh, are they? Okay.
If you could, just a brief indication as to whether there's any difference.
Yes, I'll do that via Ms. Speedy first thing tomorrow morning, if that's okay. Stormwater is a qualifying matter. I've mentioned there's still some issues around the quality of the information that we're using in terms of stormwater as a qualifying matter, but ultimately that will be up to the Environment Court to make a determination on. And in relation to matters of restricted discretion, there was one additional change that I sought in 11.2 of my evidence, which refers to the planned urban form rather than of the neighbourhood, which is very broad. I've referred to the zone, which effectively takes it back to policy 6B of the NPSUD. I haven't sought any further changes to objectives and policies in relation to the Urban Task Force's submission, and I'm generally supportive of those which have been provided in the updated set that's been provided by the council staff. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. Fraser.
Just a question relating to 10.1. Now, this is a sort of bit of a hypothetical question to some extent. If the Environment Court comes back with saying that they accept that the appropriateness of a non-statutory layer in terms of flooding from intense rainfall, what's your approach to how that be dealt with in terms of a qualifying matter thereafter? In terms of the maps are there, warts and all. Is that something that could be dealt with through discussion with council staff? I understand there's been a statement made that if there's an issue brought to their attention, they will modify those maps and or provide a means by which they can be dealt with. Is this a significant issue for you, this stormwater as a qualifying matter?
It is. Nearly every site that I look at, there's errors in the modelling, and so it is still a significant issue. I think it's fair to say there are large parts of the city that are fine, that have been correctly modelled.
Right.
There doesn't seem to me to be the urgency being applied to sorting out lots of these errors. And as I said to, perhaps if I can recall, some members of this panel may have been on the plan change panel that dealt with that matter. There are some quick fixes. Those quick fixes, I still believe, have not been implemented. Time and time again, the same issues are coming up at subdivision consent stage, at building consent stage, and I accept there have been some staff that have left and have moved on, but there needs to be much more urgency given to getting this right from a technical point of view, because we're relying on it as a qualifying matter. So even if the Environment Court come back and say, look, it was a incorrect approach, or if it was a correct approach, that's up to the court.
Yeah.
But I would really want the council to put a lot more urgency into trying to sort these maps out to get them more accurate. I mean, we're 2 years down the track, and a lot of the maps still haven't been resolved.
Where do you think things are at with respect to that hearing? Is it it's underway, isn't it?
It is. My understanding is that the current position is that the court may want to consider the issue of the non-statutory maps just as a preliminary matter.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we seem to be at an end of that one, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'll come back to you on the retirement village provisions.
Yes, if you will. I mean, a simple yes, no would be a good start point.
Thank you.
So,
yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Well, what's the contrary to that? It's not contrary.
Kia ora all, just wanted to confirm you can hear us okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Yeah.
Perfect. I understand Fonterra Limited is up next. Is that correct? Perfect. Kia ora koutou. My name's Alice Gilbert, and I'm appearing on behalf of Fonterra Limited. Now I have with me Ms. O'Rourke, the National Environmental Policy Manager for Fonterra, who has provided a corporate statement, and Ms. Fowler, an environmental planner and associate at Mitchell Dash, who has provided a planning statement. Now I understand the panel, you'll have pre-read our legal submissions, so I don't propose to take you through that in any great detail. So I'll instead just provide a brief summary of our key points before asking Ms. O'Rourke and Ms. Fowler to present a brief summary.
Yep, be very brief. Be very brief, given it's only 4 pages long. Yes, right.
Yeah, very, very brief. So generally speaking, Fonterra supports enabling housing supply in Tauranga through Plan Change 33. However, Fonterra has sought some very discrete amendments to Plan Change 33 to ensure that the potential for reverse sensitivity, which the panel will be well versed in, is managed alongside residential intensification. So amendments to address Fonterra's concerns have been agreed in expert conferencing. These relate to the site context and interface policies in the medium density residential zone and the high density residential zone. Those amendments have also been accepted in the 42A report, which Fonterra supports. There are only a couple of discrete issues that remain for Fonterra. These relate to 2 rules to reflect the agreement reached at expert conferencing and that have been accepted in the 42A report. These are set out in more detail in Ms. Fowler's evidence. In my submission, these discrete amendments are consistent with the intent of the MDRS and the National Policy Statement for Urban Development, and Fonterra respectfully seeks that the panel accepts and recommends the proposed amendments to Plan Change 33 as set out in Ms. Fowler's evidence. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any on that. Otherwise, happy for the team to answer any at the end. Please let me know what would suit.
So last week we heard from Clear the Air, and I don't know whether you've had a chance to have a look at the submissions that were lodged for that group. And they were seeking a 500 metre buffer, basically around the Mount North to act as a bit of a buffer between the residential sites and the port. And I don't know whether that directly affects the site that Fonterra has an interest in, but was wondering whether you had a look at those and were wanting to comment on them.
I haven't had a look at it.
Just to clarify, that was a 500-metre buffer on the airshed.
Okay, I haven't had a look at that, but I can have a look at that and come back to the panel if there are any concerns from Fonterra's perspective with that submission point. If there are no other questions, happy to ask Ms. O'Rourke to briefly speak to her statement.
Ms. O'Rourke, welcome again.
Welcome. Thank you. Sorry, I am having a screen issue, so I will be looking at another screen as I talk. Apologies for that. So, afternoon. Thank you. Yes, so Suzanne O'Rourke, I'm National Environmental Policy Manager for Fonterra, and I'll just briefly highlight our interests in Tauranga City. So we have a distribution centre which is comprises dry store, sheds and cool store at the port. These facilities provide significant benefit to Fonterra to enable us to operate as an exporter. So the site there accommodates 19,000 tonnes of storage. They provide storage for both product before it is exported and imported product before it is moved to a manufacturing site. They provide overflow facility for our supply chain network and are a key part of our overall operations. We also have access at the port to local container parks, which act to reduce our truck movements between the manufacturing sites and overall reduce our fuel use and carbon emissions. And the Port of Tauranga is the largest export port for Fonterra, servicing all of our North Island volumes and providing for 45% of our dairy export products. So a very critical supply site for us. So as mentioned, we support PC 33, just seeking some further refinement on that to address the issue of reverse sensitivity, which you're obviously well familiar with. So I won't go into any more detail about that. So yeah, just in summary, seeking those further changes to better protect against reverse sensitivity. Obviously recognise intensification is required, but obviously not in a location which is near to industrial activities such as those at the Tauranga port. So I'll hand over to Ms. Fowler, who can highlight some of the amendments that we are seeking, which I know have been refined down to a very small number. So great to have that input through conferencing and those outcomes.
Just before you hand over there, I just want to question on your paragraph 4.3, when you say the increased encroachment by sensitive and smaller land holdings within proximity. Are you referring there exclusively to residential uses or to other commercial and industrial uses, or both?
I would be referring to residential uses there, because that's the key concern when we look at reverse sensitivity. So yes,
what sort of distances are we talking about there?
They are quite some distance away, yes. So we have obviously looked at that, and we appreciate there is some bodies of water and some separation from that land. I can't think of the figures off the top of my head. Ms. Fowler might have those numbers. So there is quite some separation between those activities, which is why I guess our interest in the plan change is fairly confined.
Yep. All right. Thank you for that. Ms. Fowler.
Good afternoon. So as Ms. Gilbert has said, my evidence is nicely confined to reverse sensitivity and matters of discretion for two rules that kind of give effect or cascade down from policies 14 GP11 and 14 HP10. So those policies were agreed to as part of the expert conferencing. And so all my planning evidence does is, obviously I set out reverse sensitivity, what the Bay of Plenty RPS says, and then recommend that those two matters of discretion that are set out from paragraph 6.3 of my statement of evidence are amended to specifically address reverse sensitivity in the same manner that those policies do. So nicely confined.
Yep. Right. Any questions? Yes.
Just in your para 2.1, you talked about, you say that the distribution centre at the port is recognised as regionally significant infrastructure. I just wanted to clarify, are you saying that the port is, or the distribution centre at the port is regionally significant infrastructure, or both?
The port.
The port. Yeah.
Yep.
So the distribution centre isn't recognised separately as regionally significant infrastructure. Thank you.
Unless there are any other questions, that concludes our presentation.
Yes, I have a question in relation to 6.3. You've suggested adding in on C, including measures to address potential reverse sensitivity effects. What do you actually have in mind there? That's a fairly sort of general sort of statement, and I'm just trying to understand what measures you had in mind.
Common measures include things like acoustic insulation requirements for an activity next to commercial or industrial activity that generates noise. It could be making the front facade face away from the less sensitive activity. It depends on the facts of each activity, and it will be quite specific to the location. But yeah, often it's noise, it's facing the facade away from these activities.
Okay, thank you.
No, nothing for me. Thank you. And I haven't gone back to the JWS, but I think I recall that the JWS supported that.
It did to the policy. Yep.
Did to the policy. Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. Ms. Gilbert. Or are we back to Ms. O'Rourke? I wasn't sure, Ms. O'Rourke, whether you'd finished or whether were you just taking a pause for Ms. Fowler to fill in and go back to yours, or had you finished?
Sorry, that was unclear. Yes, no, I had finished.
Yes,
All
very
right.
discreet issue. If you no further questions, well, I'm happy to conclude our presentation now.
No, I think we're fine. Understand that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
So what would you like to tell us?
Got it. I'd seen some visual aids through. I sent them through earlier to another, and I just wanted to speak to those. And it just highlights the importance of in planning and what's presented in the decision making, that there's a good source of information available to make informed decisions. I've been involved in a number of RMA, city planning reviews and hearings, and a lot of the time the cultural matters seem to around significant sites, in which I'm looking to highlight, seem to slowly get phased out of the planning process. And so when there's the decisions being made around relevant plan changes, view shafts, sites, intensity, they're not actually considered and taken into consideration. So I've just got a few recent examples I wanted to speak to, and I wanted to speak to in light of the RMA and the Natural Built Environment Act. So what I wanted to speak about in the, which I'll mention briefly now, in the current RMA is decision making, section 104, 1AB, hardly gets addressed because it's relatively new. It wasn't introduced till December 21. And that's looked at ORGE consenting through applicants to look at better ways possible where there's issues that arise, to address them in terms of offset and/or compensation. With regards to cultural issues in the Natural Built Environment Act, there's a whole schedule, it's the fourth schedule, parts 1 and 2, that kind of outline the components around redress and compensation. So given that order of hierarchy, when you're looking to avoid, remedy and mitigate effects, there's two issues. That one of them is that we need to look at measuring what that loss may be. In order to measure that loss, you need to actually do your inventory. You need to build that data set. And the other aspect to it is that the planning process that's being presented to you is remiss of what I would say a full inventory, and we're going to run into more problems on the ground. And when I say we, it's even the developers, when they come across things that are not supposed to be there according to the plan. And I've been through with developers 2 to 3 years worth of bulk earthworks rescheduled just because we've identified something. We weren't allowed to go through a process, it was a desktop process to actually qualify these sites by engaging with private landowners and doing the necessary inventory and assessments to be able to provide that to them. There's probably most evidence around the identification of cultural sites seems to be an encumbering feature over the land rather than an inventory feature that would allow, in the early phases, the landowner to pursue all its preliminary assessments so they don't, in some cases, go bankrupt as a result of things that shouldn't have been there. And if I can kind of summarize it, and their responses to cultural heritage. So, you know, the view shaft aspects, we're looking at Moa and Marae. When we look at Marae, it's actually not the Marae, it's the Wharenui, the Roro, where you get called onto the Marae if there's a karanga. When you look at the Marae, it's the Marae lands, and some of the prominent areas of Marae have been reserved for some reasons. Sometimes they could be of a tapu nature, and it could be because of burials, or it could be of just the physical land use. And if I can just talk about my own marae here in Ohauiti and, at Haerengi and Maungatapu. Haerengi, you've got a good clear view shaft to Moao. Maungatapu, you don't, because you're facing the bridge, but you would have back in the top, but they removed it from the top because after the first epidemics, there were a number of burials and that up the top, so they moved everything down below, but it's still a marae view shaft. And some of these marae also relate to the various papakainga that are associated. So a number of papakainga would have past site features, such as the Ranginui Hill, which is the one heading out towards Welcome Bay, Kaitimako. And these view shafts aren't taken into consideration, especially the Welcome Bay view shafts. They're very spectacular, and I don't see anything in there that actually protects those particular view shafts around their natural character. Yeah, so now we've got some of these photos up on board. I don't know if I can just speak to those. This one here is we went through a draft process, drafting mostly desktop, and I'm from both Haerengi and Maungatapu Marae. So that's Ngaitahi Ngāti here. I'm also Te Manawa Te Wai and a representative for Ngāti Ranginui Iwi on a number of Tauranga City Council committees, or one committee and a number of forums. And so I should have said that in my I was a Ngaitiahi representative alongside the Janine, to identify these sites, and subsequently this one was removed. So there's a whole list that council has in its record, on public record, of original past sites that we identified, but it was promulgated in the draft plan. And like I was saying, the apprehension of all the encumbering features, a lot of private landowners removed them. And this was not even private land. This one here is mostly Tauranga City, and I think Tauranga City removed that. But if we can follow through with the next photo. So that actually got removed from the district plan. Sorry?
My microphone stopped working.
Oh,
are you talking about the actual notation in the plan got removed, or the actual feature got removed on the ground?
No, it's being removed now as a result, but that got removed from the council after the promulgated process. It never made it into the adopted city plan. It only made it into the promulgated draft plan for consultation. And I don't know who put the submissions against that one, but I know the developer of this, and he said to me that he didn't want to develop that. So we made steps to put out a curtilage area and remove things so that we could so he could hand it over to council. But council's reserves response was it was too steep. And I go, well, that's what you get. It's a pass site. And so he had to include it into his revised final stage of Quail Ridge. And he actually asked me, he said, like, I've tried to, could I go in? And I did do that to the Māori Standing Committee. I said, this is pukepoto, we've provided the information. And it just wasn't enough to actually, for two reasons, for council to consider it in its reserves planning, because it does have an adjacent reserve, the Ohauiti Reserve. And the other reasons was to look at how that would look in terms of access and maintenance if it became a reserve. So they're more of we're at that stage more of a practical dilemma, not really a planning dilemma. But when council went really interested, it's like, yeah, we've lost the site pretty much to well, I feel inappropriate subdivision of.
Des, you know so much more about this than we do, and I think we're struggling to actually quite work out where we're going on this one. So can I just, in terms of Plan Change 33, which is the one that we're looking at here, what are you actually wanting us to do, and what's the underlying reason for that? That perhaps we start right back there.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good, because these are just examples. These are one of many examples that I've come across. And subsequently, we lose these inherent characteristics that should be considered in any plan change. That's what I'm saying. But you fellas don't have all that information, because it just gets put out of the planning system to actually be presented in a way where you have that information in front of you. And we've come to a stage where I'm seeing in the way that that the industry is looking at, if they had a better idea of when sites could arise, that they have a process. Oh yes, we can go 3 high, we can do a lot more intensification, but they also need to know what are the issues, those preliminary issues to address, because a lot of what I'm saying, these preliminary issues are actually these significant issues that should be in these planning process, because they will arise and they end up in hearings and environment court. But what I'm looking at too, it's in those slides, was it's all good, because it's all public record, was to look at adopting Schedule 4 matters. Like, for instance, we had, and these are kind of statements made from Kaitiaki. So I've got whānau living in Kaitimako. They can only have 2 houses on their rural land. There's residential intensity on both sides. But we're seeing, we both drop down into the same catchment, but we're seeing the loss of a lot of village sites, such as what's coming up here, archaeological evidence. And we also, with the subdivisions and its implementation, we're addressing biodiversity offsets, so that they can see us being involved and doing up wetlands. But when the question's asked, oh, they've just destroyed those old villages, where's the offset for that? And that's always, since back when these were done, maybe 2015, 16, 17, around that period, it's always played on my mind with being involved in a lot of biodiversity offsetting, but not cultural. We're losing a lot of sites, but they're not being quantified and recognised. And when we do work in with the heritage, New Zealand Heritage, for those, they've just got the record. So it's like research. It's like they've got a data sample. I said, well, can't we use that sample and that information to get a better balance? And that's what I feel, how it's being progressed in this new in the new legislation. So to one step further was with financial contributions, and it mentions it in there as another tool. So if a developer wanted to do that, we said don't go up there, it's likely to find things. But if they eventually went in there, they got the authority, they created an additional 10 lots, there should be a financial contribution towards that cultural loss. That on the flip side, with our current enabling housing supply, there's no provisions or very few provisions, but the data will show you that there's hardly any Māori land development occurring, and a lot of it is tied up with going through consenting processes and financing for infrastructure. Is this where the financial offset could be? So if the developer, because I've spoken with developers and they've actually come up with that idea, well, why couldn't we put that resource into something that could help your family overcome these infrastructure issues and planning issues? Because a lot of our lands, if I can go back into the area of Welcome Bay, we had an investment from the council for Ohawiti Welcome Bay plan, but it was pulled. So we have to rely on, we're relying on government funding, and involved with the trust there. My uncle is he's one of the chairs, is that they still are not guaranteed connection to the water and the sewage. And the new water line, it's not the main water supply, it's actually a backup resilience line, was put in about 5 years ago. So we can't even get an indication to say, well, here's some rider mains to supply you. This line is actually a backup. It's not the primary supply for the neighbouring owners. And yeah, it just seems that the infrastructure's there, but it's been about 2 years into this process now that the trustees are telling me they still haven't got their houses connected because they don't have those essential water services, the sewage. And I know that they're there because I actually monitored them when they upgraded the pump station at Adler's and when they put in the water line. So it just still astounds me that they can still not connect to these services, and that it's a resilience line I don't think that's why I'm kind of flipping to the other side around enabling. I don't think it's enabling. I don't see it as enabling anything specific for. There's no policies around that to enable, housing. We got quite a bit of land actually. My uncle likes it because he says I can sit here. We've got a few hundred acres, and from that respect, when he looks at his kids and that, and seeing where they have to go, and they can't build on here. That's really sad. And these lands, they're gifts. We're lucky to retain them. They're not even though we understand that a lot of these development contributions and that have a land value differential, but we've never actually, unless it's recorded through the Māori Land Court through succession, had to pay those. So we're kind of out of the market. We can't buy it, and then we can't actually use that equity to actually. So there really needs some more drive. If it's going to be an enabling policy, there actually needs to be more drive for that to happen. And I think a lot of that enabling is not just the intensity and density. It needs to, like I was sharing in this last segment, look at the infrastructure components to include. I'm talking for a cultural Māori land lens.
Do you have some sort of specific policies?
Batteries are flat.
These are all on work time. Yes, we're obviously beyond that now. Do you have some sort of specific suggestions that we can actually think about, or just generally making us aware of the issue?
I think I tried to work in with CTWF Smart Growth around the legislation and the reform. Just as my role as an iwi representative, we also need to be aware with. We've had a good relationship with MFE lately with our Te Mano Te Wai Fund and project, which I deliver. It's actually an Ealing project, but with these connections, we look at. And I would hint towards Schedule 4 and developing policy out of the fourth schedule in the MBEA for that.
I mean, that's something that council will have to do in due course, but in terms of where we're sitting on PC 33, if it's not there already, we have problems or difficulty, in fact, not even difficulty, we're unable to actually introduce new stuff into this process at this point.
I understand it. That's ideally where I'd like that.
Yeah.
But in the interim, like I said at the beginning, is all like you said, we don't know. You should know. That's what I'm talking about. The inventory work hasn't been done. Those specific character matters haven't been addressed around these, especially the cultural view shafts, as well as the ancestral relationship with those lands. which would involve the physical implementation as well as the planning and design. There needs some, in order to, not saying we're against the intensification, you're just saying that if you're going to do that, you need to be better informed. Because sometimes you can have very heated arguments with landowners, and some of these landowners you've known for years. But because it's just fallen into a process, and you have to tell them, well, you can't do that because of this process, and it's real, and it just becomes when it comes to the cultural matters, they just become contingency. And like I say, I think we're better off in the new legislation because everything in the past has been either mitigated out of the process. So thank you for your time. I would like to see specific policy around the development of any development needs to look at providing that inventory, especially of those special character matters, so it meets those levels here. U shafts, natural character, just with the cultural natural character, cultural landscapes, cultural view shafts.
I mean, I'm just wondering whether there's anything that you can provide to us over the next sort of week or so to identify even some of the particular things that you think we absolutely need to know and have in this process. Because I mean, the Schedule 4 stuff is like that's tomorrow rather than today.
Yeah, I know. There's some work we began on it. I didn't think it was ahead. This was based on current issues, but it was pushed through the urban policy statement review, and I've done some work with a few of us, other EB reps, done some work with Nessa Steed, and I like to pull some of those forward. I'd have to talk with Nessa Steed's policy for regional council, and was involved in that. And I presented that to the committee probably about 3 months ago. Yeah, and a lot of it they couldn't address because it wasn't specific enough. I don't know, maybe a week, is it?
It's really a question as to whether or not there's material that we can actually use in our process, given that we're so far down the track at this point in time.
There could be. It doesn't look to stop the process. It's just looking to have another indicator, another check, because it's really important when the issues do arise to have that. Yeah, otherwise it'll just get swept under the carpet or ignored.
And this particular carpet's moving fairly quickly. That's one of the problems that we have. Yeah. Anything from you? So yes, have a think about that. And I mean, if there is something that that we can actually use, by all means, put it in over the next week. And I guess we'll just see whether we may or may not be able to use it, given, well, depending on what the information that comes forward is. It may be it may be that we can't actually do anything right now, but I'm happy to receive something if you want to provide that.
I'd like to do it that way because that had the view of both the tangata whenua from both councils. So
all right, okay,
good to kind of just recheck in with that and then bring that to
to your attention. Okay, we'll put that through. Sarah, is it through you formally? Or through Janine? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Ned. Appreciate your attendance today.
I need to reach you out to.
Oh, okay.
You're going to let him up then? Right. All right. Okay, well, that's the end of today's session. So we'll now adjourn till 9 o'clock. You've got to change that voice. You really do. Yes.
That's what you call artificial intelligence.
It's very artificial. And we are in holy orders tomorrow, aren't we? What do we have to address appropriately? Do we? No, just double checking. We got full broadcast and live stream, and magnet and audio visual, all that stuff is there. Assured. This is a leap of faith, is it? All right. We're adjourned. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock.